Welcome everybody here at the IBC 2015 at the Maxon booth. And yeah, it's a little bit early, but that doesn't matter. And welcome internet as well. Hopefully there are a lot of people watching us right now. I saw yesterday we had a lot of watchers from the internet, so thanks for that. And yeah, Raphael, you already did some presentations for us, and it doesn't matter, you can watch it twice or even third time because it's so interesting. This guy is simply amazing. He does an incredible job when it comes to rendering surfaces and everything about light and textures and shaders. He's the texture god, I would say. So yeah, really, I mean, I don't say it because I have to, because you're paying me money. I'm saying this because I'm really honest about what I'm thinking. Yeah, he does a great job, and of course he's shown how he does this now with Cinema 4D in conjunction, say it?
With OctaneRender.
OctaneRender. So here is Mr. Raphael.
Hey. Thank you, Glenn. Nice introduction. So, welcome everybody to my presentation, and as he already said, it's in production with Cinema 4D and OctaneRender. Take a good look of this picture. So that is what I want to go over later in this presentation. So my presentation is consistent of two parts. One part where I explain a little bit what OctaneRender is, and the second part is a live demo of OctaneRender and this scene. So this is actually not a still image, this is an animation from my demo reel intro. And the guys of Octane actually liked that very much, and they did agree that I do a presentation about that. So I'm very glad to be here, and so let's get started. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Raphael. I'm a 3D generalist based in Stuttgart. What I mostly do, as Glenn already mentioned, I do full CG stuff. Mostly in the last couple of years, I gained interest into rendering and shading and lighting stuff, so I really have a deep understanding about those things. So if you want to see more works of mine and my portfolio, you can go to my internet site. It's silverwing-vfx.de, or you can follow me on Twitter, or at least see what I write on Twitter, on my Twitter account at Raphael. So let's just watch my demo reel to show you what I normally do. And of course you can watch the intro that I will talk about later. It's just in the front of my demo reel. So let's just play that. Here we go. So thank you. So let's just skip back to the presentation here and talk a little bit about OctaneRender. So who of you who's sitting here had experience with Octane? Hands up. A couple of you. So yeah. All right. For those of you who didn't know Octane, it's a GPU-based renderer. So it runs completely on your graphics cards. Right now it runs only on CUDA-enabled NVIDIA cards, but for the 3.0 version, Octane announced that they were also OpenCL based, or you can render with OpenCL. So if you just wait for a little bit more time, you can use your Mac Pros, for example, to also render with Octane. Now, it is unbiased, so if you know that, it's really the highest quality of rendering, so meaning that there is no pre-passes or caches needed, so you just start rendering and it starts rendering the final frame. Now, spectral path tracer is just the algorithm that is used to render the images. Actually, some features I really like, or the feature that I like the most about Octane is the real-time preview. So it allows you to really see what you're doing, and we will explore this later together. So I can just see when I light stuff, when I shade stuff, what the renderer is doing or what I am doing in the final render, so to speak. So of course it's physical based, so whatever you do is rather realistic. It has very nice photorealistic depth of field and motion blur, so you can render them into your renders. And actually it doesn't take too much time to render them because the GPUs are so much faster than you experience it with CPUs, that you can apply those effects that were former very hard to render. Now this is of course only a few features of Octane. I couldn't add all because of the time I have here. So one more important thing is scalability. So instead of buying a new computer, if you want to have more power at your hand, you can just add a second graphics card into your system and double the render speed. So it's very scalable, and you can add up to 12 cards with one license. I don't know how to do 12 cards in one case, but you're allowed or you're able to do that. So you get insanely high speeds, or you can reach insanely high speeds, render speeds with one machine that equals the render power of a whole render farm on CPU. So the last point here, it's relatively easy to use, so there are no very big settings for GI or for anti-aliasing you have to learn. It just works. It's just preset, or because it's a path tracer, it doesn't matter because it just renders the things more or less how they are in the real world, and therefore you don't need to have this complicated settings to optimize stuff because it's already very optimized and very fast. All right, and if you want to have more information, you can just go to Autoy. So they're doing OctaneRender, and visit their website, and they have a lot more information about the stuff that they're doing on their website. All right, so here are a couple of renderings I have done with Octane. So it has a very high ray depth in terms of reflectivity, in terms of translucency or transparency. So also the GI is very high, so you get a very realistic result that would take a lot of time with other render engines. For example, the standard settings of the ray depth is 16, so the reflection depth is 16, and also the GI depth is 16, which is incredibly deep. And of course that adds only to the realism of the scenes. I do a lot of spare time science fiction work, so this is one of the renders I did for spare time I just built up this thing. I don't really know what it is, but it looks cool. So hopefully you like it too. And for Cinema 4D Advanced Production Techniques, I used to do this image here, where I wanted to show off how incredible detailed you can render with path tracer, and how incredible useful it is to know the physics of materials. So every material in here is made as closely physical plausible as possible, so that it will look so it will give the most realism to the viewers. And I think I at least a little bit achieved that goal. So let's get finally started and dive into Cinema 4D and into OctaneRender. So that's the last slide here. So I made this intro for my demo reel, as you already seen. It rendered on 2 GPUs. At the time I only had 2 GPUs. So you can also use multiple different GPUs, and that will not that will not affect the rendering. So that you can just build in whatever you have at your hand. I rendered at one GTX Titan and one GTX 980, and the rendering actually was done with full GI, depth of field, motion blur in full HD CinemaScope, and the render time ranged from 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the close-ups and how the scene was laid out, how the shot was laid out. So production time was about 2 weeks. I did this between jobs, so I wasn't working fully on it all the time. All right, so now let's get started here. I just want to open the scene firsthand without textures, so you can see. Hello? All right. Just thought my microphone wasn't working anymore, so I just let this play through here. So you can see it's just, normally you would break this up every shot by shot to give it to different artists if you're in a studio environment. But as I was working alone, I just used this stage object to get the cuts inside of the scene. So I was also not working with handles or something for editing. I was just deciding on the edit inside of Cinema 4D. Of course, if you're working with clients, I work for myself here, you need to have handles and everything. But this is the advantage of working for yourself. You already know what you want, so there's no communication problems. All right, next I want to just load the textured scene. So let me just open the intro textured. Now Octane will load the textures into the viewport, so you have basic texture support inside of the viewport. But it really doesn't matter how basic it is, because the real advantage, and I already said that, is the real-time preview. And let me just open that one. I just saved a preset inside of Cinema 4D that I set up before, that gives me another window here. And this is the Octane Live Viewer. So I will just load the scene inside of the graphics card. And right now I'm working only on one Quattro K5000. And I use that with a low priority. And actually, if you're using 2 cards, it is recommended to use the one card that you have your displays connected to at low priority or some priority setting, because otherwise it's very hard to work fast, because all the power is going to the rendering, and your displays are not the drawback of your displays will be not as good anymore. Right, so the really strong thing here is, and I mentioned this before, so if I move the camera, you can see instant updating of the live viewer, rendering the reflections, the scenery, the lighting, everything in real time, so I see what I'm doing. Of course, that's not only possible with predefined animation, so I can just jump out of the camera here real quick and turn my viewport around, and you can see that Octane is still very responsive and giving me a live feedback. Now, of course, not only goes for cameras and geometry, this also goes for lighting. So I have my lights here that I lit the scene with. Let me just show you where they are located. So let me just turn them on. Here you go. There are just 3 area lights that I used in my scene to give a little bit of more life to the scene and a little bit more color contrast. So you can see bluish lights and reddish lights. So if you watch the intro closely, you can see that there are highlights on the pyramid. Sometimes they are blue and red, and this gives a very nice lighting effect. But I am able to just turn off and on different lights, and they are just rendered or not rendered inside of the viewport. And of course, tweak my settings here with the lighting environment. So if I just turn up the strength of a light, for example, you can see it reflected in the object here. So everything that I do is taken into account by Octane and rendered. One more thing I really want to show here is, let me just go back to my original camera. So I'll turn on my stage object again. I used HDRI to give my scene more life and reflections and even lighting. So what I did here is I brought in a Studio HDRI, and you can just turn it around and see where your reflection looks good at. So I can just tweak, let me just turn off the lights so you can see what's coming from the HDRI better. Here we go. So let me just rotate that, and you can instantly see where the reflections and where the lighting is coming from. So this is a really big advantage if you know renderers that doesn't have a live viewport. You would be sitting there turning the HDR a couple of degrees and then do another test render, and then turning it again and do another test render, and you never could be sure if you found the perfect spot. So here you can just while I'm sliding, see where the reflection is at and how it's looking. And I even did a little trick here, animating the rotation for different shots, because in different shots I needed a slightly different lighting situation and a slightly different reflections for the rendering to look good. So I just animated the position or the rotation to get this. Now what I want to do next is I want to just open my pyramid in a separate scene and show you what I did for shading. Now let me just open that one. And of course, as with the other rendering, you can just load it into your graphics memory. And let me just turn off the alpha background so you have a better look at the pyramid. And for texturing, let me just explore the texturing process here a little bit. So what I do is I UV unwrap the pyramid. I did this using body paint. And then I exported the picture of the mesh inside of Illustrator and did some graphics on it. So I had some graphics for the pyramid, and then I also generated out of Illustrator a bump map. So you get the elevation details for the surface. And then what I did here is I baked the noise. So what you can do inside of Cinema 4D, just create a noise, sorry, it's not a noise, it's ambient occlusion. So what I did is created an ambient occlusion shader and baked that to a texture. And I baked that with normals that are facing outwards, and I did the same with normals facing inwards. And what this gives you is an edge map of the object. I don't want it to have an object where that's really clean. I wanted to have this object really to look as it has been through a lot and scratches on that and stuff like that. So what I did with those two maps, I built a scratch map. And I will use all those maps later in Octane to build up the pyramid look. So just here another screenshot of Illustrator, as this program is not installed here, how it would look if I just do the texturing inside of Illustrator, and that's a screenshot of Photoshop. All right, so let me just introduce another great feature of Octane, and this is the node editor. So those of you who are already worked with nodes before, you know what I'm talking about. For those who are not, it's just a more easy way to understand where materials or where textures are coming from and where they are going inside of the material later. But before I start explaining that deeply here, it's better to show it. So I will just create a glossy material here and apply it to my pyramid. Here we go. And that should be reflected in the live viewer straight away. So let me jump out of my camera, and you can see here that I get the reflection on my pyramid. So if I move my camera, you can see the reflection moving. Now I want to get it in my Octane node editor, so I click Get Active Material, and I get the active material. So what I can do in here, I've made a diffuse material, so I want to load this in as a texture. So what I can do is go to Image Texture and just drag that in, and then load the texture I created before. So let me just search that. Here we go. And that is the color diffuse texture. So I can just connect those two nodes, and then you can instantly see the texture on the pyramid. Right now the reflection is rather mirror-like, but as I wanted to have a very used up pyramid, I just want to have a rougher texture that has variance in it. So what I can do, of course, to get it rougher, I just go to the roughness and increase the level here, and you can immediately see that it gets more blurry. But I want to have a variation in there. So what I can do is take another texture and plug it into the roughness channel. So I will do that just here. Now get another image texture and load, for example, this here. In my library, I have a lot of textures that are tileable and that just resemble some noise structures, which I very regularly use in my textures to make them more real life-like. Because, as you all know, real life is full of small irregularities. It doesn't come perfect. So you can make your CG renders more realistic when you add small irregularities to them. Now, if I connect this to the roughness, the result is everything else than subtle. So I want to have a more subtle result here. You can see that the black parts of the texture resemble a more mirror-like surface, and the white parts of the texture resemble a more glossy surface. If you're coming from V-Ray, that unfortunately is just flipped, but for me, myself, it makes more sense because black resembles a value of 0 normally, and 0 for me is just no roughness, and 1 is total roughness, so that makes more sense to me than the V-Ray approach. All right, let's just get on. I just want to have more control over the roughness, so what I could do is I could just bring in a gradient, and I can just drag it onto the line and it will connect automatically. Now with that, just to show you, I can just plug it into the diffuse. You get some really psychedelic colors here, and of course I don't want that to happen. Therefore, I changed the coloring scheme in um, my gradient. So what the gradient actually is doing is the same thing that the colorizer inside of Cinema 4D is doing. So who is aware of the colorizer inside of Cinema 4D? Some of you, all right? So for those who aren't, it just remaps values. So right now it's taking in the values and giving them out the same way they are. So I mapped black to white values to black to white. Actually, I just don't want to have this high contrast in this picture, so I just compress the contrast here by going in here and set this to 40, for example, and this to 60. And this gives me slight less variance in the colors. And when I just disconnect or just reconnect my texture to the pyramid, you can see the effect is now still there, but much more subtle than it was before. And this is how you would go about, or how I do all my textures. And of course, the real nice thing is that you can just play around with the settings here and see a real-time feedback what you're doing. Now, you can also in the next step, I want to create those scratches that I talked about. So what you can do here is create a mix material. And a mix material is very easily explained. It just mixes materials. So you can go ahead and drag the material one here, and now we are missing the second material. I will just real quickly create that by control clicking on the first material and duplicating it. Now I of course want to have a metal surface for the scratches, because the paint layer is taken away at this point and the bare metal surface comes through underneath. So I'll just go into the diffuse and set this to a darker color, because the metals don't normally have a lot of diffuse. Normally they don't have any diffuse, but if they're worn and just a little bit older, they get slightly rusty and the surface becomes maybe gets a little bit diffuse. But I just make it simple here and just make the diffuse black. So right now I'm using the index to control the reflectivity of the object. The index refers to the Fresnel effect. So if you're used to physics, you know what the Fresnel effect is. The Fresnel effect determines how much light, if light bounces on a surface, it determines how much light is transported into the surface and how much light is reflected. So when I change this value, I get different reflection strengths. For now, I'll make my metal with the simple Fresnel because it's faster. There are more physical approaches to that, because metal surfaces normally have a more complex Fresnel than non-metal surfaces. But for now, I just increase the value to 8 to give it more reflection, and then I can mix it. Now, of course, I have to apply that material. So let me just apply it to the pyramid here. And right now, what you see is a 50-50 mix of the paint material and the metal material. And of course, we don't want that. We want to have our metal only at the edges. So of course, you have a slider with a mount where you can tweak between full metal and full, what's it called? Full paint. But we want to have a texture where we can drive this effect. So what I do is bring in another image texture, and something I forgot to mention before is if you have a black and white texture, so every texture is loaded to your GPU's memory. To save up some memory, you can just load it as a float texture. Now an RGB texture has 3 channels, red, green and blue, and a float texture has only 1 channel. So if you're having a black and white image, you can just load it as a float texture, and therefore you save 2/3 of the capacity of that texture inside of the memory of the GPU. Of course, for one texture that isn't much, but if you have a lot of bump textures and stuff, it makes sense to do that. So right now you can already see it working. I just connected this texture to the amount, and what it does, it just maps the black values to material 1 to material 2 and the white values to material 1, so you get the nice effect of scratched edges. Of course, what we can do right now, because our metal looks very static, it has no variance in the roughness too, so what we can do, just bring in another gradient, for example, and just connect it to the same texture here, and then go into the roughness of the metal. And now you can just give that material a slightly different look than with the other gradient. So you draw from the same texture, but get different results in different materials. And that's a really great thing you're able to do within of Octane. Now, there's still something missing here, and this is the bump I used to have before. So what I do is just bring in my bump map. And this thing is getting a little bit complicated right now, so let me just see what I can do to get the bump slot visible or reachable for other materials. So I will just bring in, not a material, sorry, I will just delete that again, image texture again, and load the bump map. The bump map, of course, is also a black and white image, so I can just set it to float here. And then I just can create a bump map. So you immediately see that you have this indented typeface here, and the other stuff slightly risen from the surface. But what we don't get right now is the scratches, because the scratches normally are set at a lower level than the paint because they are taken away from the paint. So what I can do here to keep the paint layer also visible, or the paint bump also visible, is mix two textures. And this is working exactly the same way as if we mix two materials, but on a texture level. So I can bring in, let me just connect it to texture 2, and then I'll have this one as the texture 1, because this can also work as a bump map for metal, for scratches. And if I connect this to my material, you can see, right now you can't, so let me just see where this has gone wrong. Maybe it's just an update thing. Oh, and let me just also connect it to my metal. So yeah, now you can see it that it works. Octane can be very doesn't need that much of a bump, so normally you have to be rather subtle with your bump. So right now you can see that you can see some pixelation artifacts on there. And actually Octane itself does not have a strength control on the bump. So what you could do to avoid that, or to get around that, is using a multiply texture. So you can multiply your bump with a float, and the float is basically a value from 0 to whatever number you want. So right now it's 0.5, and of course if I'm using my this as the second slot, everything that comes in will be multiplied by 0.5, so you get the half of the intensity of what was coming in. Now 0.5 is still a little bit strong, so I go with 0.1 or 0.2, and you can see that the bump now looks less pixelated and more nicely. Alright, I think we have successfully textured our pyramid here. So you can see everything's working fine. And the real advantage of Octane is also you can go really close and check if everything's working. So you can see your used edge here. Maybe the reflection glossiness of the metal is rather strong, so you can go in here and change this gradient to another value and see it updating here. Maybe it's too glossy, so just make it more reflective. And this is the real power of Octane, so you can see the real-time update every time you change something, and therefore allows you a much faster workflow in shading. Now, of course, this workflow here is there only works when you have UV set unwrapped and have this the scratch texture. But there's actually a way you can do that procedural within Octane. So what I do now is I will open my material scene, my material preview, and show you how you can do something similar procedurally. So let me just close everything here and open my material preview. For those who already seen some of my presentations, I always have that with me because it's quite nice to work with and to do material research. Right now there's a cow paint material on it, but we don't want that, so I'll just override it with another glossy material. And basically we are doing the same thing as before. So what I do is I go in here and open the Octane node editor, and just to be sure I will reload the material. Yes, it's the material. And I will duplicate this and then create. Can you all hear me? Because the neighboring booth is quite loud. All right. Okay, so I will just go ahead and take this diffuse level further down, so we'll see the nice reflection effect. And on the second material, I will create a metal material again, so let me just do that real quick. Index to 7 or 8, and then introduce some glossiness to it because it always looks nice. Here we go, that one too. So right now we have a slight update error here, so we can just reload the scene and hopefully, yes, it will just bring the material on to the object. Now, those materials are very basic. Of course, I showed you how to use the slight variation with the texture before, so this is just about getting the edges without UV map. So what you can do is use the dirt for it. And the dirt is basically doing the same that that ambient occlusion texture is doing normally. So you can see here that surfaces that are very close together get the darker tint. You can especially good see that inside of here. Now I don't want to have this effect on the outside, I want to have this on the inside of the object, and Octane allows you to do that very easily by inverting the normals of the effect. So right now the rays are shot inside of the object, and then the dirt is evaluated. So right now the dirt is rather big, so I'll just scale it further down and make it more intense. So you can already see where this is going. This is giving me a nice map for my edges. Instead of doing this, of course, with the diffuse of my first material, I will later then plug this into my mixed material again. But right now you can see that the effect is rather the same over the whole surface. It's not irregular, which would look much more organic and much more realistic. So what I can do about this is I can get another texture in between the dirt and the material and the output. So what I do is I'll just create another mixed texture, feed in the dirt in the texture 1. In the texture 2, I will just use a float texture that is set to 1. And 1 in the RGB color space is white, so 0 is black, 1 is white. So if you use that float value, you can get different gray scale values out of it. And the amount slider, I want to actually use a texture. You can also use a noise, but a texture gives me normally more organic feeling of my surfaces. So I'll just load that texture here. I think looks good. So let me just load that. It just asked me if I wanted to copy it to my location because the folder is not directly where the Cinema 4D file is. So what I have now is I have the mix amount of those two textures driven by the black and white values of that picture here, and of course you can also set it to float. So when I connect this to my diffuse, you can already see it's a little bit broken up, but something's not right with the contrast. I want to have really harsh contrast in my texture here. So if I only connect this texture, you can see that the values are not black, but rather gray. So I do what I always do. I just implement a gradient in between and just control the contrast with the sliders here. Of course, you can do much more advanced stuff with the gradient too. You can set it to complex, and instead of those pickers, you can load textures. But I don't want to confuse you here, so I'll just do it the simple way. So let's just increase the contrast by sliding those two sliders closer to each other. And right now we get a really strong contrast with black and white map. And if I reapply that to our amount and then apply the amount to our diffuse, you can see that now we're getting much more of the effect than that I wanted to get a nice scratch map. So of course, instead of using that on the diffuse of the material, we just have to create a mix material, assign the mix material to the object, and then connect both of those materials to the mix material, and the dirt shader, instead of to the diffuse, we will connect that to the amount of the dirt, to the mix, sorry. And here we go, you have a material where the materials are mixed over the noise and over some functionality with some nodes. Of course, the effect is right now it's very huge, the distribution, so I'll just adjust that. That was too small. Here we go, and then you get your nice metal edges, used edges on the object. And this is a way that also renders really fast. So for example, if you noticed, this only runs on one card, and depth of field was enabled the whole time. So it was rendering with depth of field, but also allowing me to tweak my materials and do everything I wanted inside of Octane. So of course, this is one way to do it. There might be different other ways. And this is only the texturing part of the presentation, so I prepared some slides where I show you what I did in compositing. So let me just go back and select my examples here and my breakdowns. So I will go through two breakdowns, one that is made of slides and one this is a video. So this is the result that Octane gives me right away. So the beauty pass is also really nice. So you don't have to, you can tweak the render inside a lot, so you get a really nice result. So you have to not spend too much time on compositing. So this is the raw render. Then I added some glow. You can see that on the highlights on the pyramid if I go back and forth. And then a vignette, because it draws more attention to the centered object. Then I added a lens flare because lens flares are really nice. And then a second lens flare. Everyone loves lens flares, but I'm always trying to make them more subtle. I don't like the lens flares that distracts the hell out of the audience. So that's just a very subtle effect. Now there's an exposure adjustment. I render with 32-bit EXR files, so I have the full floating point value at my hand. So if something is overexposed, I just can readjust the exposure in my compositing later. And also it gives me a nice feedback because those lights here are very bright. So if I use 32-bit, they give me the information of the color and the information of the brightness directly inside of the compositing program, and so I can have a much more realistic glow on them. Then I added some color corrections to make it a little bit more cinematic. I added this greenish tint to it, and that also is the final render. And if I switch back and forth between those, there's not a lot of difference, so it's just a little bit of final touches that I added to the already very good rendering of Octane. So next I want to show a small video of the last shot where I implemented the projection of the holographic projection of the demo reel presenter. Of course, let me just open it with VLC. Here we go. So this is the raw render, and as you can see, I also rendered the depth of field or the unfocused effect. So it's so fast that I didn't care to produce that in post. I just rendered an unsharp image. So next I rendered some beams inside of Cinema 4D. That beams are coming from the advanced render, so they're just fitting together very nicely. Then I just added some more beams that were projected from the graphic I did, and you can see the graphic here. So what I did, I just used that graphic to project the light, and this is giving me those nice beams behind the graphic. Of course, the graphic is a 2.5D element inside of After Effects. I just animated it, exported the camera out of Cinema 4D, and then just fit the camera animation with the Octane animation. And then just the usual stuff, lens flares, and some color and contrast corrections, and I don't know, already the final image. So that's the final image you can see in my demo reel. And one more short thing, want to give a shout out to the guys at Redstone Music, because they have composed the music of my demo reel. So they did a great job. So if any one of you needs music for some commercials or demo reels, just ask those guys. And I think that concludes my talk here. So thank you everyone for being here, for coming. And thanks Maxon for having me. And if someone has a question, now is the right time to ask it. So thank you. Any questions? All right, I'll be on the booth for a couple more minutes, so if you find out you have some questions, just come to me and ask them.